Every generation gets a documentary, a TikTok trend, or at least a Twitter war. Gen X got forgotten. And honestly, they prefer it that way. But what they don't want you to know is that their psychology is the most terrifyingly effective survival blueprint any generation has ever built. And nobody is talking about it. Here's something that should bother you. We have entire university courses on boomer economics. Millennials have been psychoanalyzed to death. Gen Z gets a new mental health label every quarter. But Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, the people who built the internet you're watching this on, who raised most of Gen Z, who currently run the majority of Fortune 500 companies, they exist in a psychological blind spot. And that blind spot is not an accident. It's a strategy. Most people think Gen X is just the quiet generation. Show up, don't post about it, go home. But underneath that silence is one of the most psychologically complex generational mindsets ever documented. Today, we're cracking it wide open. To understand Gen X, you need to understand the world that built them. And it was not a kind world. Picture this. You're 7 years old. You walk home from school alone. You pull a key from around your neck, literally hanging on a string like some child survivalist, and let yourself into an empty house. No parents, no babysitter, no after-school program with organic snacks and a feelings circle. Just you, a box of cereal, and a news report about nuclear war. This wasn't neglect. This was normal. Both parents worked, divorce rates were skyrocketing, and the cultural attitude was, kids are resilient, they'll figure it out. The terrifying part? They did. Psychologists call this forced autonomy. When a child is repeatedly placed in situations where no adult is available, the brain doesn't just adapt, it rewires. The prefrontal cortex develops under pressure. Gen X didn't learn independence from a self-help book. Their brains were literally sculpted by it. But this came with a massive cost. Attachment theory tells us that children without consistent emotional availability develop an avoidant attachment style. They learn that relying on others leads to disappointment, so they stop relying. They stop asking. They internalize a brutal rule most of them still carry today. If you need help, you've already failed. Let that sink in for a second. This is why your Gen X boss doesn't micromanage you. It's not trust. They were never managed themselves, and they turned out functional. Mostly. They assume you'll figure it out too. And if you don't, that's a you problem. Now, let's talk about why Gen X trusts absolutely nothing. Imagine watching every institution your parents told you to believe in collapse. Watergate. The Challenger explosion, the AIDS crisis ignored for years, Iran-Contra, the Cold War where you practiced hiding under your desk because someone might end the world before lunch. Every week, the message was the same. The adults are lying, the system is broken, and nobody is coming to save you. Psychologists call this defensive pessimism, deliberately lowering expectations so failure doesn't destroy you. Gen X didn't invent it, but they perfected it into an art form. Before any situation, a job interview, a relationship, a deal, a Gen Xer unconsciously simulates everything that could go wrong, not because they're negative, because reality trained them to know things do go wrong. Let's talk about something that genuinely baffles younger generations: Gen X's almost pathological need for privacy. You see, Gen X made their mistakes in the dark. Literally. No smartphones, no social media, no cloud. If you did something stupid at a party in 1987, the only evidence was a blurry Polaroid someone eventually lost. Your embarrassments had an expiration date. Now, a single bad moment gets screenshotted, shared, and remixed into a meme that follows you for the rest of your professional life. Gen X watched this happen in real time and thought, absolutely not. Here's what most people miss. Gen X doesn't avoid social media because they don't get it. Many of them literally built the platforms. They avoid it because they understand it too well. Every post is a data point, every share is a vulnerability, every public opinion is ammunition that can be used against you later. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition from a generation that watched institutions destroy people their entire childhood. The rule became simple. Never give anyone more information than they absolutely need. This is why Gen X parents can drive younger generations crazy. They won't share feelings, they respond to emotional vulnerability with practical solutions. You're sad? Here's what you do about it. Not because they don't feel, but because they learned early that feelings, when exposed, become weapons for other people to use. If that defensive pessimism is Gen X's shield, then irony is their sword. When you grow up where sincerity gets you hurt, where the government lies, corporations betray loyal employees, your parents' marriage might be a facade, you developed what's called ironic detachment, a defense mechanism where you engage through humor and skepticism so nothing can touch you directly. Think about their cultural output. Fight Club, Seinfeld, The Simpsons, Nirvana, every one of them dripping with irony, cynicism, and a fundamental distrust of authority. This wasn't entertainment, it was group therapy. Gen Z uses irony as absurdism, playful, chaotic, nihilistic, for fun. Gen X irony has teeth. It comes from genuine pain, processed through humor so many times it looks like indifference. But it's not indifference. It's a scar that learned how to smile. And the fascinating part? They know they do this. They're completely self-aware about their own defense mechanisms. They'll tell you, yeah, I use humor to avoid my feelings, and then immediately make a joke about it. Defense mechanisms all the way down. So, how does this fortress of skepticism translate to the workplace? Gen X doesn't hustle, they don't grind, they don't post motivational quotes at 5 a.m., but they are, statistically, the most productive generation in the current workforce. How? They learned to work before work had an audience. Their first jobs were paper routes, mowing lawns, fast food, jobs where nobody watched, nobody clapped, and the only reward was money. Not fulfillment, not passion, money. They learned work is a transaction, not an identity. This is fundamentally different from millennials who were told to follow your passion and Gen Z who want work aligned with their values. Gen X just wants work to function. Pay me fairly, don't waste my time, and leave me alone to do my job. That's the entire social contract. But here's the paradox. Despite this transactional view, Gen X is fiercely loyal. But not to companies. They are loyal to competence. They will follow a brilliant leader through fire. But the moment that leader reveals incompetence or dishonesty, Gen X is gone. No drama, no exit interview rant, just gone. Because they watched their parents get laid off after 20 years of loyalty and learned a brutal lesson. Companies don't love you back. This is why Gen X built the freelance revolution in side hustle culture long before it had a name. Always a backup plan, always multiple income streams. Not because they were entrepreneurial visionaries, but because they were traumatized into never, ever putting all their eggs in one basket.
Let's continue with the bridge generation. Here's what nobody appreciates enough about Gen X. They are the only generation alive that is fluent in both worlds. They grew up analog and became digital. They remember rotary phones and they set up your Wi-Fi. They can write a handwritten letter and debug your code. They are the universal translators between boomers and millennials, between the old world and the new one. Psychologically, this is extraordinary. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch between different mental frameworks, is one of the strongest predictors of resilience and adaptability. Gen X didn't just develop this skill, they were forged in it. What researchers call integrative complexity, the ability to hold two opposing systems in your mind and operate in both, is something Gen X does before breakfast without even realizing it's rare. They learned entirely new technological paradigms every decade. Vinyl to cassettes, to CDs, to MP3s, to streaming. Typewriters to word processors, to personal computers, to smartphones. Each transition required abandoning mastery to become beginners again. They did it every time, without complaining, without a support group, without a YouTube tutorial. Gen X handles change better than any generation, not because they like it, they absolutely don't, but because their entire life has been one long exercise in adaptation. They've been practicing for chaos since they were 7 years old, eating cereal alone in an empty house. And here's the irony. The generation most equipped to lead through uncertainty is the one least likely to raise their hand for the job. Here's where we get honest. Gen X's greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability. The self-reliance that makes them effective, it's slowly killing them. Gen X has the highest rates of workplace burnout, the highest rates of substance abuse of any current generation. They are the least likely to seek therapy, the least likely to ask for help, and the most likely to suffer in silence. Psychologists call it high-functioning invisibility, performing so well on the outside that nobody thinks to check what's breaking on the inside. That 7-year-old with the key around their neck never stopped being alone. They just got better at pretending it was a choice. The term is compulsive self-reliance, a trauma response where asking for help feels not just uncomfortable, but existentially threatening. It feels like failure, like being that kid again, except now you're supposed to be the adult, and adults handle things. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. Gen X is in their mid-40s to early 60s, peak careers, raising teenagers, caring for aging parents, holding together families, companies, and communities, doing it all while pretending they're fine, because that's what they've always done. And the cruelest part, the generation that taught itself to survive alone now desperately needs connection, but has no muscle memory for how to ask for it. So here's the truth about Generation X. They're not cold, they're armored. Not lazy, efficient. Not indifferent, exhausted from caring about everything while pretending to care about nothing. They are the generation that was left alone in an empty house and somehow built the modern world from that kitchen table. The bridge between everything that was and everything that is. And bridges don't get monuments. They don't get thank you notes. They just hold the weight, quietly, relentlessly, without asking for recognition. And if you're Gen X listening to this, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, whatever, it's fine. But it's not fine. And the fact that you just thought that proves every single point I've made. You were never just the forgotten generation. You were the generation that taught itself how to survive being forgotten. And that is the most powerful psychology of all. If this made you feel something you immediately wanted to suppress, congratulations, you might be Gen X. Hit subscribe because we clearly understand you better than your therapist, and you don't have a therapist because you don't need one. Sure,